and welcome to today's lesson. So in today's lesson we're going to be looking at oligopolies and price competition. So I had a great way to kind of sum up oligopolies and firms in an oligopoly, and that's kind of looking at, think about it like you've got about 8 cats in a bag, right? And those 8 cats can either tear each other apart or just snuggle up together and get on with life, and that's very much a good analogy for oligopolies. And today we're going to be looking at kind of them clawing each other apart. So we're going to look at price competition. I've got some examples here of price competition, and also we'll look at a few more. So limit pricing and predatory pricing and price wars we're going to have a look at today. Some other pricing strategies might be just revenue maximizing or sales maximizing, dumping, though that's far more of a macroeconomic concept than micro because it comes up globally. But we're going to look at some others. I've got here kind of like the grey area of pricing strategies. So pricing strategies are pretty much what they say on the tin. They're just strategies to do with price, so competition to do with price, so lowering the price or changing the price or having, you know, kind of an introductory offer or having a loyalty scheme that reduces the price over time. Like those things are price competition. Now I mentioned a loyalty scheme there, but I also am going to add into that bog off, so buy one get one free. They're kind of the grey area. So they are pricing strategies because they do affect the price, but they're also non-pricing strategies because they don't affect the per unit price for everybody. So they're kind of this grey area for the exam board. It did come up in a question before looking at pricing and non-pricing strategies. I think it was 2018 in paper 1, section B. But in that paper, in the mark scheme, when you have a look at that, you'll see that actually the exam board allows you to use buy one get one off, buy one get one free, and also loyalty schemes that reduce the price over time. So like a free coffee after you've bought 10, as either price or non-price competition. So you can, just depending on how you sell it or how you look at it, you can have that as either. But today we're going to have a look at these three. These three are purely price competition, so purely adapting the price, and we're going to have a look at the reasons why and, you know, whether they work or they don't work. So the first one we're going to have a look at is limit pricing. So limit pricing, here is our definition, so make sure you've got that written down and you know it, is where an incumbent firm or firms, so an incumbent firm is a term that you're going to use and hear a lot. It means a firm that already exists in the market, tries to deter entry or expansion of any fringe firms, right? So basically you have firms on the outside who have been attracted by that supernormal profit. They want access to the market. They've got high barriers to entry and exit. They can't get in, or they're trying to get in, or they do exist but kind of on the fringe. And a firm, the incumbent firm or firms in the market, might decide to limit price to push those barriers up, create some additional barriers to stop that firm from getting in. So we will have a look at what that means, but by start off we're going to look at this diagram. So we're going to start off just with a normal diagram and assume, like we were doing the exam, that we've got an original diagram first. So what did we learn in our last lesson? Well, we learned that our AR and MR is relatively inelastic. So our AR and our MR are very inelastic because we don't have as many firms and the high barriers to entry and exit. And we know that our marginal cost is very similar, and our average cost, the firm is going to be making quite a lot of supernormal profit. So as always, we're going to draw that original diagram here. We're going to presume to start off with that the firm is profit maximizing, and we're going to go up here and we're going to go across, and this is our price. That's the same as always, so we know that we're going to show a lot of supernormal profit, so we need that AC curve to cut here relatively low, so let's put that in there. This is our average cost, and then we can see here that the firm is making supernormal profit, so we go from that price line all the way across straight down here to our average costs, and here we can see that quite a lot of supernormal profit. So this is the price that the firm is charging normally in the market. So this is their price that they're charging when they're just operating in the market. They haven't introduced any limit pricing. So limit pricing is a way that a firm can deter these other firms from coming in. So basically the firm is willing to take a hit in its supernormal profit, it's willing to, in the short run, get rid of its supernormal profit, reduce its supernormal profit, not have negative supernormal profit or make a loss, but get rid of some of that supernormal profit to ward off other people into the market, so it's not worth coming in because there isn't that much supernormal profit. Or what the firm is relying on is that their average cost is lower because they're established in the market, they're not having to compete, than an incumbent firm, because we know those barriers to entry and exit may well be to do with advertising, which means that the firm may not be able to have particularly low average costs, right, when they're entering, because they have to compete with the firms that already exist in the market. So therefore, the firm that is coming into the market, the new firm, their normal profit kind of price is going to be a lot higher than the incumbent firms. So the firms that are coming into the market, when a firm decides to limit price, is actually going to be a price that, though this firm, the incumbent firm, might be able to make some profit, a firm that's coming in won't be able to make any profit. So when we think about logically what price that might be, or what range of prices that might be, so what I suggest you do is you take a pause in the video and think about and try and see what price that might be. Think logically about the things that I said about the firm and their aims in that situation. Okay, so that price range is pretty much any price that's before their sales maximizing. Right? So what is a sales maximizing price? What happens at a sales maximizing position? Well, at the sales maximizing position, the firm is doing just that. It's maximizing the amount of sales so that it doesn't make a loss. So what price here, along here, is the price at which the firm is only making normal profits without anything changing or adapting. There's no movement here. Just what is that price? So again, pause, try and find that price. So that price is obviously here, where the average revenue is equal to the average cost. And obviously at this point here, so the firm is making, so that's our price here, I'll put PS because it's the sales maximizing price. And that is this quantity here. So any price point between here and here is going to be a limit price, right? And any quantity that the firm decides to produce at between here and here is a limit pricing quantity, right? So revenue maximization may well be limit pricing. Any point beyond, and obviously we know that that's here, any quantity from here to here is also limit pricing. So the firm is lowering its price, reducing its SMP, so any point between here all the way down to here is reducing that amount of supernormal profit until we get to this point here, which there is no supernormal profit, it's just normal profit being made. That's limit pricing. Now, limit pricing is obviously a decision made by the firm that's just based on other firms in the market. So that very much fits in with our idea of interdependent decision making. It's not to do with the consumer. So we're not lowering prices to be better for the consumer. We're not lowering prices to make consumer welfare better. Does that happen? In the short run, it does happen, but in the long run, what do you think that firm is going to do when they've pushed out and warded off that competition? Well, they're just going to raise those prices right back up, and if not slightly higher, because they have the pricing power to be able to do that. So limit pricing is, in the short run, you might be able to make an argument that it's good for the consumer, but actually that's not what happens in the long run. What would potentially be better for the consumer in the long run is to have more competition and them entering into kind of a price war or settling on a lower price naturally. We'll have a look at that in just a moment. So limit pricing is, the most important things you need to understand is that the firm can still be making supernormal profit or making normal profit, and that's limit pricing. Another thing you really need to understand is that actually the reason why the firm is doing this, and they may switch to revenue maximization, that may be a form of limit pricing, is to ward off competition. Right? And that's really important for you to understand. This decision is to push competition out of the market. It's an competition is kind of an unfriendly way to operate in a market. It's not consumer friendly. Now, obviously that might kind of make you think a little bit about the competition, the CMA, and what they might do about that decision. But actually, it's very difficult to prove. How can you decide that a firm is not just revenue maximizing to clear stock, or maybe they just want to do an offer, or maybe they're doing it because they've got some cost saving measures. So it's actually very difficult for the Competition Commission to see limit pricing. Limit pricing is not necessarily strictly illegal. It's uncompetitive, but it's not illegal, right? It's not in the best interest of the consumer, but it isn't going to lead to any fines, particularly by the Competition Commission. And we looked at that as a possible reason why a firm might decide to revenue maximise over profit maximise to ward off competition, but without alerting the CMA. So the next one we're going to have a look at is predatory pricing. So predatory pricing is kind of that one step further. So predatory pricing is a deliberate strategy of a firm to drive out competitors by setting very low prices, and those prices specifically are below their average variable cost. So what does that mean? We're going to draw our original diagram first, as always, just like we did before, so we can show that change. The reason I'm doing that is because in the exam, a static diagram is not going to get you very many marks. You need to be doing dynamic diagrams that show a change. So make sure we've got our axes on here, very poorly labelled, but at least they are labelled. So here we've got very inelastic average revenue, and then our marginal revenue. Again, our marginal cost is the same. We choose that profit maximising position here, go up, find our price. As a oligopolist, I know that they're going to be making a lot of supernormal profit, exactly the same as before, so I'm going to hit that AC to make sure that I'm showing that. This is a way, again, to keep saying this, to make sure you get those diagrams right first time round, to save yourself some time and feel confident in the exam. So, hit that AC like that, and then we can see that our supernormal profit, did it in green before, I did it in green again, is all the way along here, down, and then obviously it's the difference to our average revenue and our average cost, and this is our super normal profit. So predatory pricing is where we are making lower than limit pricing. So our limit pricing position is going to be at here, our sales maximizing position. So I suggest you kind of pause now and think about where this might be, or what predatory pricing might look like, or what that might mean. But we have here our price, our kind of bottom limit price here, and our kind of maximum quantity. This is our quantity of profit maximizing, sales maximizing. So our predatory price is anything that's a quantity above this and a price that's below this. So any price kind of in that range, the firm is going to be making a very small loss or a large loss in the short run. So again, why are firms, or how are firms able to do that? Well, if you're an incumbent firm in an oligopoly, one, the chances are that you have huge amounts of economies of scale, and your average variable cost is quite low. And also we know that firms, as long as they're covering their variable costs, can sustain themselves in a market. So incumbent firm may well be able to sustain itself. It might have very good kind of negotiated contracts with its suppliers. It may be able to sustain itself at this predatory pricing level for a long period of time, potentially. And if you start to combine that with an idea of having large amounts of reserves or retained profit, they may be able to sustain this idea of predatory pricing for even longer than you might kind of think about on the surface. So let's say that they decide to price here. Well, this idea of predatory pricing, I'm going to put it as P, predatory pricing, PB, would be much lower than even their sales maximizing, their kind of maximum limit pricing here, and this is the quantity which they're going to produce at. And we can see that at this point here, the firm is actually making a loss. So we can see that this quantity here and kind of the average cost curve is much higher than the average revenue curve. They are making a loss here. But they can do that and they can sustain that. They can sustain a loss. The chances are that either an incumbent firm that they're deciding to compete against and try and push out the market. So Tesco's might decide to predatory price to push out Aldi or Lidl out of the market, a firm that's gaining a lot of kind of market share very quickly. They might feel intimidated by that and decide to switch to predatory pricing, try and push them out of the market, get them out so that they can sustain their market share. Or it might be that they're stopping a big player coming into the market. So maybe a firm's coming into the market that they don't want to come into the market. They know that actually they're in quite good standing. It may well be a firm that exists in another market already that's decided to switch and diversify into this market. And they might want to stop that happening or ward them off and kind of let them know what they're getting in for. And therefore predatory price, the chances are that big incumbent firm, their predatory pricing they could sustain for longer or potentially have lower prices than somebody who's coming into the market or an incumbent firm that they're even trying to push out of the market, like a smaller firm they're trying to push out of the market. So predatory pricing is really again, it falls into that idea of like being really bad competition policy, like it's uncompetitive, and it just kind of falls into that idea as well that it's not good for consumers. On the surface this might seem like it's good for consumers, but actually it's not good for consumers at all. It's bad for consumers. In the short run, great, lower prices, excellent, outstanding, but actually in the long run you're ending up with one firm who then has pushed out another incumbent firm or has stopped competition coming into the market, and what they're doing then is that they're just making their AC more and more inelastic. So when they come back to that profit maximizing quantity, actually their price is going to be even higher because their demand curve, their AR curve is even more inelastic. So it's very anti-competitive. It's also illegal. Predatory pricing is illegal, but incredibly difficult to prove. Right? To prove predatory pricing, you really have to have a detailed kind of overview of firms' accounts to understand what kind of prices is past the limit pricing position. It's very difficult to prove, and you actually don't see many firms being accused and successfully prosecuted for predatory pricing by either the CMA or whatever competition authority exists in that particular economy. However, there are some examples of civil cases, so firm versus firm cases, not firm versus government cases, but firm versus firm cases for you to look at. So I've got some of them here. So Uber has been accused of predatory pricing to kind of warn people out of the market or to push firms out of the market. It's a really good article on Uber versus black cabs and Uber versus other kind of firms like Lyft across the world about predatory pricing. They've been accused of predatory pricing a lot. Amazon versus France. This is a fascinating case where Amazon so France basically ended up fining Amazon $1,000. I think it's 1,000 euros or maybe even possibly more every single day that they offered free delivery, because they said that free delivery was uncompetitive, and then Amazon just ended up just paying it because it was less than their amount of profit. So their AR and MR actually shifted out because of it more than the increase in their average cost of the fine, so that it was worthwhile for them overall to make the decision to pay the fine. So the French government responded by pushing them out, trying to push them out of the market by banning free delivery. So they actually made free delivery illegal. So Amazon ended up just charging 1 cent for delivery. It's a really interesting case, have a look at it. And Walmart was accused of predatory pricing as well. So these are three kind of cases that you can have a look at in your own time. So the last thing that I want us to have a look at is price wars. So we need to look at price wars first. Price wars are fascinating. They're one of those things that you physically see, like you physically see it around you. You get to see the adverts, you get to see it happening. Like it's really exciting microeconomics. So price wars are like really intense periods where businesses decide to lower their prices continuously to try and either maintain their market share or to gain market share from a competitor. So we've seen this happen a lot, and I'm going to go through some examples and then we're going to have a look at what that actually means and how that happens. So the mortgage market was an example of kind of a price war pre-2008, which I mean macroeconomically might be useful to look at. That's a kind of micro reason why. part of the 2008 crash. Hulu versus Netflix in America, that was an interesting predatory prices. Cinemas were an interesting example of price wars even, sorry. And supermarkets in the UK is probably the one that you know most about. Not recently, but definitely previously, there's been huge amounts of price wars. So kind of Asda versus Tesco, the two kind of big powerhouses there. And actually, weirdly, the other members of the oligopoly didn't really bother to kind of, they stuck to non-price competition. Whereas those two really went at a price war, and kind of every little helps was obviously their slogan, but they ended up kind of having huge amounts of advertising to do with like, we're cheaper than Asda, Tesco's cheaper than Asda cheaper than Tesco's, and looking at like, even if you went to Tesco's and you did your shopping, they'd be like, oh, if it was this much cheaper at Asda, we will give you money back. So it was a really kind of interesting price war to watch. And what it means is the firm is making their decision on price based on the other firm. And they're making a decision to lower their prices to push out that firm, and then the other firm has to respond and either match that price or lower it even further. And a price war is where that exactly happens. So they keep lowering the prices until one of them is eventually pushed out the market. Price wars are bad for, well, good for consumers in the short run, bad for consumers in the long run, again, because you end up with one firm being pushed out the market. But they're also bad for firms, because you have to, one, increase the amount of advertising costs whilst also lowering your price. So you're really chipping away at your supernormal price, which is usually why they're intense and short, and firms usually tend to settle or come to an agreement, and then we see prices kind of getting back to their normal equilibrium point. But they definitely happen, and they're kind of a last resort in oligopolies, and we see firms trying to avoid going into price wars quite often. It's kind of throwing down that ace card, where do you go from a price war? But it's also one of those things that when you start, it's incredibly difficult to stop. So they happen quite often, but they're very intense, they're very short, they're usually quite bloody and over quite quickly. So one of the big things that you need to understand is that price wars are bad for consumers in the long run. And actually, when we talked about predatory pricing and price wars, there have been exam questions before. I think that 2008 paper, the exact question that I'm thinking of, it was the 8-mark question, asked about price and non-price competition. And in that question, you had to look at, you could use predatory pricing, but you had to say that it was bad for the consumer in the long run, because if you say that it's good for the consumer, that's just not correct. You haven't understood the economics of that enough. You need to be able to say, and students weren't awarded the marks if they didn't add that it was bad for consumers in the long run, right? So you can say it's good in the short run because you get this kind of idea here. So you've got your price war, you've got your firm's AR, you've got your firm's MR, you've got your MC. I don't know why I've drawn it so high, but I have. And remember, nothing else is changing for the firm. So the kind of AC, unless they decide to invest in advertising where it will increase, it is staying. So this is your price normally, and this is your supernormal profit here. All the firm is doing is just chipping away at that by lowering its price, lowering its price, lowering its price, and just continuously lowering its price until it's chipping away its own supernormal profit. So it's bad for the firm, but it's also bad for the consumer, because as soon as you push out that person from the market, if Tesco's managed to push out Asda, and it's probably unlikely to push out the powerhouse that is Walmart, but if they did manage to push out Asda, then what do you think would happen? What do you think the firm would do then? Well, they'd just immediately go from this price right back up to here, and there'd be no competition in the market. They'd be kind of the big player left. So it is bad for consumers, and it's also bad for firms as well. So they're quite hotly avoided. So this is a really nice way for us to end, because next lesson we're going to be looking at how firms, or why firms end up avoiding this and end up kind of looking at non-price competition. We're going to be looking at the kink demand curve, and we're going to be at game theory, which is like my favourite area of economics. So I'm so excited to teach you about that. So please stay safe, and I will see you later on this week.